All right. So today in our first session, we have Mr. Guy Arpin of Fromage Gruyere SA, who is our
Hello.
export manager in all things Swiss cheese, um, coming to us live from the office today.
That's right.
Awesome. Glad to have you here. I'm outside the office. I'll come in later on. We can hang out.
And so are you, I believe.
I'm way outside. Hey, Guy, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Well, thank you. Would you give us just a little bit of background on who you are, how you ended up in Gruyere, and kind of what your responsibilities there are at Fromage Gruyere, just to give people some idea of what you cover?
All right. So I'm a Frenchman, and my parents are not cheesemakers. So that's two things that are quite different in comparison to the people I'm working with here. I started working in cheese in 2010, originally in one of these places making cheese like the picture you have behind you. And this was my first cheese experience. And then I decided to train as a cheesemaker, so as an apprentice. And then I was hired by my current employer to promote the sales of export for Greece. I'm a trained cheesemaker, and my job is to sell Gruyere abroad, outside of Switzerland.
So you started at an Alpage dairy,
Yes.
and then how did you make contact with? Because it was Gerald Roux at the start, right? How did you make contact with the Gruyere, with Fromage Gruyere initially?
So the place I apprenticed after the Alpage experience was one of our suppliers today. So the cheese I was making at that dairy was supplied to Fromage Gruyere.
Okay.
And so
when you say that, so Fromage Gruyere is a private company, or like what is the structure there at Fromage Gruyere?
So it's a private company, and the shareholder portfolio is our suppliers are shareholders, and milk producers from this area are shareholders, and historical families in the area also are shareholders, and some of those families own the estates that we can see behind you, for instance.
Okay.
So it's pretty local ownership.
So you then are kind of I mean, does that make it like a cooperative? Like
No.
It's interesting to me. So when you're working with your suppliers, so are your suppliers consistent over decades? Does that mean that, like, how many cheesemakers, how many Gruyere producers are you buying from right now?
Around 30 village dairies and 15 Alpage.
So are all of those dairies are shareholders in Fromage Gruyere?
Yes, through another company. So they're all shareholders of one company, and this company owns shares of our company.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So when you buy cheese from cheesemakers, how does it work? So as I understand it, milk price is set by
the AOP.
Association, the AOP, right?
And the cheese price as well.
And the cheese price, the price to you. So even though they're shareholders, even though you're kind of working together on the project, there's a set price that they're paying for milk, and then that you're paying for cheese.
Correct. And in the same way, there's also a set price for the cheese I sell to you. Oh no, wait, there isn't.
No, but that's a good point, right? Is that
yeah? So we all start off with the same product, the same price, and the only slight differences in purchase cost for us will be quality. So and that's the same thing for the milk. So the cheesemaker will deduct some amounts for like out of quality, out of spec milk, and a little bonus for milk that he actually wants. So that's basically a dry extract. So the farmers will get a bonus for that. So in the same way, we have our own bonus scheme, but it's negligible on the total amount of cheese that we buy. And so there's a little bonus scheme, and that's partially based on the grades that they get from the AOP every month. Yes.
Okay, so there's like a floor price.
There's a
like
floor
there's
price.
a minimum, and then you have you incentivize your producers to produce
Yeah.
better, not necessarily more cheese, but better cheese.
And there's the big bonuses from the AOP. So anything above 18 points, you get a big bonus. The maximum would be 20 points. So that bonus is from the AOP directly. Yes. And then you can also get a cut. So if your cheese gets sent for fondue or for like pig feeding, then obviously you don't get paid the full price for that. But that's
pig feed, you don't get as much as you get for human feeding.
Well, yes. Well,
yeah,
depends which side of the Atlantic Ocean, I guess.
Yeah. I don't even know what that means. So when cheeses come in, who does this grading? So you buy cheese when it's 2 months old, 3 months old. Like when do you take possession of cheese from the dairy?
So in a normal scenario, we buy it at 3 months. Yes. So it stays from up to 3 months at the dairy. Starting from this at the third month, it gets transferred here. We weigh it, and this is the weight that we that have when the ride gets unloaded. Here is when it gets weighed on the scale, and this is the weight that we buy from the cheesemaker. So it stays. So at this point, it gets stored in our cellars. And then it stays there at least for a month until the AOP comes in and grades the cheese at 4 months, right? So there's a month period before the AOP grades the cheese. So we don't grade the cheese, the AOP does. We have a first pre-assessment, but that's only for our private reference. It doesn't have any value for the AOP. We just have a first assessment when the cheese comes in. So the AOP grades the cheese, gives it a grade, and this is when those bonuses or deductions get decided, right? And then
at
there's
4 months. So
at 4 months.
Really quite early. So what are they looking at? What is it at 4 months that can tell you what cheese is going to be?
They're looking for faults, not qualities. So you're looking for that's interesting because it's somehow changed a little. It used to be in the old days that a Gruyere would have certain faults and that's not the case anymore because probably customer taste has evolved a little bit. But one sign of this, for me at least, is paste. So it used to be that having a paste that was too buttery was considered a fault because the cheese wouldn't. It was considered that this cheese would be subject to rancid, because of the higher fat content, and also if it's also fattier, then there's also it tends to be there's also more water as well. So higher moisture means less subject to aging. So the aging will go faster, and you won't be able to keep the cheese for as long as a drier paste cheese. But in comparison,
is less true now.
Yeah, because for some reason they realized France was a big market for the Gruyere wheels, and in France, a buttery paste is considered a quality, not a fault.
Okay, so does that have to do with the differences between Gruyere and Comté? Does Comté?
Yes and no. It's like habits. For instance, cheese mites. Yes.
Yeah.
So in Germany, that's a no-go. In France, that's a quality.
Yeah, interesting.
And in the US, well, we never send you cheese mites, so I wouldn't know, would I?
Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, so the cheese comes in at 4 months, it gets graded, and then for your purposes as an affineur, like what happens like, do you start to do like a separation then? Are you looking at like this batch
Yeah.
we think will do this we think, like over time you've developed like a protocol for that?
Yeah, so just coming back to this 4 months date, in between 4 months to 5 months, there's a time when the cheesemaker can start like objecting. So he has like a time window when he can decide, no, I want to take action against this decision, and he has like a 15-day window when the cheese would be graded again and either degraded or upgraded. And so if obviously if the decision is kept that way, then the procedure is at his cost, and if not, then it doesn't cost anything. But that's secondary, isn't it?
Is that uncommon, or is that's not something? Is
It's
that,
not uncommon. It doesn't happen every time, but like if it's a cheesemaker who's used to having 19.5 or 20 and he has like an 18.5, he will of course appeal. Yeah.
yeah, interesting.
And so this is why, well, this is all calculated so that the appeal time is still okay for when the cheese is ready for sale at 5 months. So no Gruyere is allowed to be sold before 5 months of age.
Do you feel confident that over time with these 30 cheesemakers that, like, does your team, are they able to sort of read those early assessments?
Yeah.
And predict pretty well, you know, what is going to be 6 months, what's going to be 8 months, what's going to be 12 months?
Yeah, usually the pre-assessment is maybe just 0.5 off. So like we can predict a 19.5 and the final grade will be a 19. That's a possibility. Or we just predict a 19.5 and he gets a 19.5. So that's one thing. Because we taste the cheese so regularly and we taste so many different dairies, it's just something that the guys who buy the cheese know well, right? So cheese assessment. And then, like, answering your question, if you buy cheese from a particular dairy regularly, and that's you buy cheese 12 times a year, you know which. So if there's no accidents, if there's no quality problems, you know which batches from which dairies you're going to keep to do what. This you know well in advance. And in your case, like, we know that we buy cheese from specific dairies to send specifically to you, and this is not changing.
And so, you know, okay, you have a general idea of what we're going to need in October of 2021. So as cheese is coming in the fourth quarter of 2020, you're able to partition to say, I know we're going to need 112-month Lecrae in next October.
Yeah.
So
we're obviously not in a world where we all know what's happening in October 2021, are we?
Yeah, right.
But like based on past sales and based on quality of what we know, and like, you know, we talk to the cheesemakers. So if we see there's problems, like either they tell us or we see it, like it doesn't go unnoticed. So if we know when we buy the cheese that cheese from that particular month from that particular dairy is not good, like we're going to give a heads up to the people that need to know in advance. So like you're going to know
the
that
4-month time frame really comes in handy, because, you know, if everything had to be based on final aging profile, then it would take a very long time to sort of feed back that information, right?
Yeah, and it's not entirely stupid. So the guidelines from the AOP for grading the cheese tends to be that we age the highest grades. So that's a first solid assessment, right? And then it's also based on experience here in the cellars.
So okay, so over time, there's some producers of your 30 that have just kind of been consistently higher. You know,
Yeah.
we talk a lot about this. Do you notice some of the top dairies kind of plateauing or kind of falling off? Do you notice some dairies that were kind of middle range kind of improving? Like, how do you kind of predict? Because you know, you and I have talked a bit about Lecrae. supply. Obviously, it's a cheese that's in high demand. So we've been starting the process of kind of looking at how we're going to supplement that, right? And so like some solid area is one that we've just discussed, but and I think that what you and I discussed is that like you're finding their cheese is aging out a little better than it had previously.
So part of the answer to this is niche selection, right? So you can always argue that it's a marketing concept, but part of this is that it's actually selecting your best wheels to send to your valued customers. So the idea is that you want to keep sending wheels from the same dairy and at the same high level quality. And so basically what you have to do is identify any faults well in advance, work on these, work with the cheesemakers if there's any faults. And like what I'm noticing now is that the individual making the cheese at this particular site is what matters most. So of course there's topography, and of course there's cow feeding, and of course there's milk quality. But what we see can have the most influence in a sudden way is the individuals that are making the cheese every day, right? Because there are so many things that can go wrong during one particular day. Like we don't have much influence over a bad cheese. If the cheese comes in bad, then we're not gonna make it better. Just make
right.
It's also easy to make a cheese worse when it comes in good, but it's impossible to make a cheese good when it comes in bad, right? So what you're saying is you're asking, do you see any differences from those mid-tier dairies? And my answer is yes, because if the dairies change ownership, or if the cheesemaker retires and a new one comes in and starts buying the milk, then he or she may have a very different approach to quality, for example, and like consistency and maybe like habits. And this shows the difference can be dramatic, good or bad.
Do you find that the incoming generation is different than the old generation? I mean, Jean-Marie Dunant, who makes cheese at Lecrae, is in his 60s, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, eventually there's going to be a new generation cheesemaker coming into that dairy.
Sooner rather than later, my friend.
So what are your concerns? What are your, like, how do you imagine that's going to manifest?
Well, the first question is rather immediate and financial is, will the new cheesemaker still sell cheese to us? That's the most crucial question, isn't it? Because what?
They have a choice there. Like
there's always a choice.
And take over the financial end of that.
So what happens is the cooperative offers the dairy for a bid. Yes, so they place an ad in the paper, and young cheesemakers, probably my age, maybe 35, maybe late 40s, are looking for, in French we call that a milk to buy, right? Or like take over a milk. That's what we say, reprendre un lait. And so the cooperative is going to receive a series of bids. The bid is based on the amount of money you're going to pay for every kilo of milk you're going to buy, on top of the AOP pricing. So the AOP pricing can be like, I'm saying like 85 cents on the kilo, right? All right. So that's what is that going to be? That's going to be 40 cents on the pound. Yes, something like that. So that's the base price that no one can buy below. And then on top of that, the cheesemaker is going to purchase the right to use the dairy and to make money out of making cheese. And that's a rent, right? So he's a milk buyer, but he buys the milk to the farmers who are lending him the dairy because they own the dairy.
So he's going to pay over market to compensate for the use of the space and everything else.
It's separated. It's not over market.
Okay.
It's just there's a base price that you can't go below to pay for the milk because it's Gruyere AOP milk. But then on top of that, and that stays within the dairy operation because like no one knows about this. It's like private business.
Yeah.
He or she is going to pay something around like 10 cents a kilo to that's going to be his rent. So it's not like thousands of dollars decided in advance per month to be able to use the dairy, whatever the amount of milk that pours through it. It's you buy or you rent the use of the dairy and you pay for the milk. You pay for the rent through buying the milk.
Is it purely financial, or are there situations where the cooperative might say, oh, this is a talented cheesemaker, this is someone we get along with, or it's just
Sadly, it's almost almost always based on money. So it's going to be awarded. The milk is going to be awarded to whoever promises he or she is going to pay most, right? Because we also see scenarios where a cheesemaker makes promises and then a year later, like it just doesn't work because the rent is too high and the cooperative has been too greedy. And so then there's another bid. And so that's one aspect. The second aspect I would say is who this cheesemaker has behind him or her. So in this case, us, is no bank is going to back somebody on this during this business, like this transitional business. You can't go to a bank. You have to go to an affineur, right? So the bank is us.
So that's where the relationship comes in.
Right. So the candidates are always backed by an affineur.
That's pretty interesting. I mean, it's something that like I don't think that we would really think about. You know, we've talked a lot over the years about how in the US Gruyere is kind of a monolith, you know, that there is this cheese called Gruyere and it comes from many places and so on.
You mean Gruyere?
Gruyere. So to know that there's like all of this happening within the culture is interesting to me. So
like Christoph.
Yeah.
His job is to keep his cheesemakers selling cheese to him. That's his job. Well, not his only job, but that's his job. And like the process is having interviews with potential candidates from those dairies that are up for bid and like deciding on business plans and deciding, well, how much cash you need? Like this is the basic question because there's like infrastructure to buy from the former cheesemaker if it wasn't owned by the cooperative. Like in general, that's the robot. So the cheese washing robot is generally owned by the cheesemaker, not the cooperative. So he or she has to buy the robot back from the former operator, and then they're stuck. So that's a huge number.
Yeah.
And then he or she has to have 3 months worth of milk pay in his pockets.
Right.
Because he will be paid by us only at the 3rd month. Like I said, when the cheese comes in is the moment we buy it. So during the first 3 months of the operation, there's not going to be money coming to that dairy from us. So all the money will be lended by us, not just given.
Right.
If you see what I mean.
I do. So over time, Lecrae has shown itself to be like a top level dairy for you.
Yeah.
You developed this 1655 program to kind of separate from the larger group of cheeses. How many cheesemakers or how many dairies are currently in that program for you?
4.
And Lecrae being so where is Lecrae right now in kind of the hierarchy within Fromage Gruyere?
It's always either 1 or 2.
Yeah. And are they making more cheese, less cheese? Like, we had some concern going into the new year about supply, and not grave concerns, but just, you keep an eye on it. It's obviously in demand. So, well, I guess first of all, like as somebody who is exposed to 30 dairies of Gruyere 12 times a year, what is it like? Do you find something inherent in the cheese making in Jean-Marie's manner or cheese making in the final product that separates it to you, or is that something that you just let the customer kind of drive? Like when you taste the 4 dairies that are in 1655, do you have a preference day in and day out as far as how those cheeses land? Because to my palate, Le Cray is like identifiable. We've sat and we've tasted a lot of cheese together, and like blindly over time, you really can pick out this one or that.
And this is what we're facing now that we're pitching alternates is, well, people, it's a positive aspect and a negative aspect is people are always comparing it to Le Cray. And like, so there's 170 dairies producing Gruyere and each of them is going to taste different. So of course it's not the same cheese, but the problem is it's been so good and so consistent and so like you say, identifiable and desirable that the customers always say, no, we want another one. Yes, all right. Well, it seems we need another one because you don't have enough of it. But then we want it to taste the same. And my answer is, well, it'll never taste the same.
Yeah.
It'll taste different.
And still have its own good qualities. I mean, I think that's the challenge for us.
Yeah.
Is having people be able to self-determine kind of just be involved in
so part of my job is to drive people away from thinking no wait, I want your replacement strategy to taste exactly the same,
right?
So my answer to this is no. I mean, you can already forget about this. However, I have other cheeses that I want you to taste, and I think they taste different, yes, but excellent.
Yeah.
In a different way.
Well, and okay, so without getting too far into it, just to switch gears a little bit, we sold a Vacherin Fribourgeois for a long time. Mm-hmm. That Vacherin is no longer around for us.
For various reasons.
And so you sent us a new Vacherin in maybe October or November that we tasted. Yeah. And really liked, very different kind of texture. But can we talk a little bit about like how Vacherin and Gruyere interact in your part of and like are there dairies that just make Vacherin, or is it always kind of a product alongside Gruyere or alongside raclette or something?
So it's an interesting subject. So obviously Vacherin Fribourgeois means the cheese is only made in Fribourg. And what other cheeses do you have in Fribourg? And in general, that tends to be Gruyere. In the German-speaking part, it used to be Emmentaler, but most of those dairies have switched to Gruyere since. Yes, and so until the late 60s, or like until the 60s, unfortunately for the Vacherin, it's generally been hidden behind the bigger brother, and that would be Gruyere. And so it's most of the time, and again, unfortunately, it's most of the time been a product that you produce when you have too little milk to produce a real Gruyere, or too much, so like a secondary.
So a dairy that makes Gruyere can make X amount of Gruyere per day, extrapolated through the quarter or through the year, whatever. And then if milk production is high, then they say, okay, well, we don't have enough quota for all of this milk, so we're going to switch over to Vacherin for today.
No, I was thinking more about like smaller dairies when you're down to, all right, you need 400 liters of milk to produce one Gruyere wheel, and you have 200 extra, for example. So what do you do with those?
Right. Yeah.
And so with those, you produce 3 Vacherin.
Yeah. Because
right?
yeah, okay.
Does that make sense?
Does Vestron have the same kind of quota structure as Gruyere?
Yeah, more or less. So you can't, so now not anymore can you decide, oh, well, I've filled my Gruyere quota, so I'll just produce the amount of Vacherin I want to. It doesn't work that way. Vacherin has major challenges because it's like I dare say this, but it's very difficult to find a good one.
Yeah.
So one that isn't either bitter or stinky or both, which is horrible. And so so that's the first challenge. The second challenge is 70% of production is graded into fondue,
Right.
so shredded. So that doesn't encourage producers to produce cheese that's actually good to have sitting on a cheese plate.
Yeah.
Right. And then there's history. Like I said, always apart from exceptions, but always behind the bigger brother, that's Gruyere. And so to answer your questions, yes, there have been Gruyere Vacherin dairies, solely Vacherin dairies, but these tend to disappear and they get merged with other dairies, bigger ones, and those produce Gruyere as well.
So the Vacherin that some of the people are tasting today, where are you selecting, like when we kind of got back into the Vacherin conversation, are you thinking based on characteristics, or is there a dairy that you're specifically kind of earmarked because you thought it would be something that we would enjoy?
Both. So first of all, it's produced by one of our Gruyere suppliers, so supplying Gruyere to us. We don't buy his Vacherin because we're not a Vacherin affineur, but he wanted to pitch us with a Vacherin that was, according to what he said, more suitable for export. And by that we mean not stinky, not red, and not bitter. So I said, yeah, well, let's taste it. And we tasted the first batch, a second batch, a third batch, and then we sent you some, and you weren't disappointed, it seemed. Obviously, like those who've tasted the Vacherin that you had before are always going to say, well, it's not the same, and clearly it isn't compared to the one you had 2 years ago. It's like you can't compare
it's in some ways, I mean, it's the same cheese in name alone. I mean,
yeah.
And I have to say that there's something about when this cheese arrived and tasting it and just having a sense of its consistency, frankly.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a cheese that I think has legs. It's very eatable and snackable, but also I could see it being used in more typical like a fondue. You know,
Yeah.
it's inappropriate for that, but it really, you know, just as kind of a melting kitchen table cheese, it was really great for me.
Yeah.
And extremely manageable. I mean, I think that the old cheese, you know, part of the problem was that we spent a lot of time on consumer and cheesemonger education to say, no, I know this looks like it has issues, but
here, taste it.
Yeah. And like you can only do that, you know, that only stands up for so long. And I think that in the current environment, where Doug and I don't have the opportunity to spend as much time in shops, you know, other than in this format.
Shop.
Yeah, it's tough, and I think that having a little bit more consistency is maybe pragmatic, but it's functional.
Yeah, and so apart from that, it's also a dairy, you know, like this might be stupid to say, but like selling to an American customer, you always have in the back of your head, you always have an FDA inspection in your up your sleeve, and like you also, when you select suppliers, you have to think, well, is this a place I can take my customer to, and B, is this a place I can take an FDA inspector to?
Right.
Although this won't happen because we won't get this dairy FDA registered, but like this like when I have an FDA inspection, I have to be confidently answering questions saying, yes, I believe this is a place you could walk into.
Right. And I think it was
Well, not you, but somebody else.
No, but once we started doing the foreign supplier verification, and that's really, I mean, if not to get again too far into it, but like I think that the perception is that that's about, is it, it's not really about it's not about is the dairy filthy or not. You're not buying cheese from places that are unsafe
No.
or anything like that. But when you and I are touring a dairy and you say, well, look, this building is 400 years old. They don't have screens in the windows, and that's an issue for an international inspection.
Yeah, no screens, no foot baths, no,
right, no, and
no like,
yeah. That historically they're kind of non-issues, but in these very specific third-party audit structures, like it's an issue. And
yeah, and so there's a difference between me selling cheese to you, and we both know that the actual thermometer for this is, would we feed this cheese to our children? So that's the only question I'm answering, and the answer is always yes. But the flip side to this is, would this be a dairy I could take an FDA inspector to? And sometimes it's no.
Right.
So it's two different things, right? Like I feed my kid every day with cheese that I know an FDA inspector won't go to. Or like, well, he or she would, but just once.
Like, I mean, the global economy means that some historical production kind of gets localized.
Yeah, and I think that's very good.
Yeah. And it gives us more reason to come visit, so we can taste the things that we can't necessarily always have. Speaking of diversification, recently we have started working directly with you on some of the other projects we've done in Switzerland over the years. So with Conrad retiring at the start of the year, we're starting to work with you on like Hallerhocker. There are some other cheeses that some people are going to be tasting that we sent them. Hallerhocker, Gutensberg, Schnebelhorn, the Usi Mini. What is your role in those things? So I mean, for you and I, some of it comes out of foreign supplier verification. Some of it comes out of your kind of audit structure, your ability to do laboratory work and to do proper labeling and handling and all of that. So as you've been kind of now, we're about a month and change into this new arrangement. What are you finding to be like challenges with these other products?
Well, thankfully, Conrad has done an excellent groundwork of providing the right information beforehand. And this has helped me to prepare everything well in advance with your staff, and particularly Melissa. And so everything was smooth sailing, and there wasn't like a dive into the unknown and like consistently walking in the fog. And so I'm really grateful that we've been provided the right information at the right time by the right people. And like occasionally, if I have a question, I still know who to call. But like now, this is sailing. It's you also have the occasional accident, and those might be snow, so like delays, and then broken pallets and like smashed boxes. But apart from that, working with these people has you would hope so, that working with these people for a month and a half has been pleasant so far. But we haven't been working for a month and a half. We've been working for a year now, because we've been planning this well ahead and like deciding on crucial stuff, and discussing terms, discussing conditions, both with suppliers and with you. So it's not, hey, how has it been for a month now? No, it's been almost a year.
No, I mean, it was a little over a year ago that Walter and you and I were in a car in the middle of California, kind of starting, that process even then, and discussing it and tasting cheese together. So it's been kind of a pleasurable experience to see that transition. I just miss Conrad, but
Back in the time when we were allowed to be in a car together.
exactly, back in the good old days. What of those cheeses, for you personally, as somebody who's like got a deep Gruyere background and obviously worked in a dairy where Vacheron was produced, and you have a very kind of like French Swiss leaning experience. What is it about those cheeses, or is there anything over there that you're finding to be kind of a nice addition to your own plate at home? Is there something that is it nice to have Hallerhocker around in a way that it wasn't around before? Like what's standing out to you?
Like, yes, it's always going to be a matter of changing your habits, right? Because Hallerhocker, Schnebelhorn, Gutensberg, Usi Lucy, Usi Mini are not cheeses that people would have on their plates here, because they're like it's almost as if as if they were from different countries. Like if you talk to my colleagues here, when somebody says, "Oh, I sometimes eat Emmental at home," and like most of them would be like really. So an Emmental is the closest cheese to us, like is the closest foreign cheese to us, because the Emmental production area sits between our area and Hallerhocker area. So the closest cheese to us is Emmental. And then you have like talks about Etiva, for example. So when you say, "Oh, I buy Letiva," people will be like, "Why?" Because so yeah, there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of like being conservative behind that. Obviously, Letiva, this says Gruyere d'Alpage, and Gruyere d'Alpage is almost the same cheese as Letiva. It's going to be a question of production canton, and that has to do with religion. Gruyere d'Alpage would tend to be a Catholic cheese, and Letiva would be a Protestant cheese. So there's that, and then there's also always the question of foreign cheeses. This is becoming more and more of a topic, because we see more and more imports. So there's more choice in shops here. It used to be that the only cheeses we could buy were Roquefort and, I don't know, Parmigiano, and that was it. Like, I'm oversimplifying, but that you get the picture.
Right,
so now,
and giant like 5 kilo bries.
Yes, the world's finest. So like it's going to take more time for people around here to adopt Hallerhocker as a cheese they could have sitting at home. And the first question will be, well, how do you buy it? Where do you buy it? And like, so here, I don't know of a place to buy Hallerhocker. We don't have, like, we can't find it in the store. And this is where regional Switzerland is interesting, because it's very easy to find a piece of Hallerhocker at Co-op in or Migros in Zurich, but not here.
Yeah.
Like there's still regional distribution of specific cheeses in a way that you can find Gruyere everywhere, yes, but you can't find Vacherin everywhere in Switzerland. Yeah. So you can find, obviously, Vacherin Fribourgeois, you can find 7 different kinds here, but 0 in Zurich.
Yeah.
And again, this is simplifying, but like here, if I want to buy Hallerhocker for this evening, for tonight, I don't know where to buy it.
Yeah. Well, you just have to have it fall off the pallet.
No, what I could do is pick a wheel from your next order and then invoice it to you as well. So instead of sending you, instead of sending you 300, I send you 299 and we're good.
Let me just send a text to Melissa real quick. As we wrap up, the sun is out in Chicago, as you can see. What does Alpage season look like this year? How did COVID affect the season last year? What's the outlook? It's something that we spiritually set our watches by. So where are we at? going into the spring right now?
Last year was really good. We didn't have a huge heat wave. We were a little concerned about water in the beginning, and then we got flooded. And that's when you believe in God, that is. And thing this year is we're almost still mid-February, and we have like it's very warm now, very warm, and alarmingly warm. So like we already have allergies in the air, like pollen already for chestnut.
Yeah,
What's the first trees that have pollen? Chestnut.
sure.
Yeah. So already, and we're still mid-February. We're not in March, and it's already warm. So, I mean, yeah. And then I guess it's the whole discussion between climate and weather, right?
Yeah. It's not quite pollen season here yet. We're still waiting.
Yeah. Well, it was an amazing gap. There was like a 25 Celsius gap versus last week.
That's crazy. Yeah.
It was
we're
like
about to get that this week. So
yeah, like now is 15 and last week was -10.
yeah. Doug, do we have any questions?
Not yet coming through. I kind of want to ask about the climate change and alpage production. Guy, we talked about this.
Climate change is a hoax, dude. Get your facts straight.
Oh God. We talked about this in the fall as we were receiving our alpage last year. What do cheesemakers make any adjustments when the season fluctuates like that? You know, we talked about 2019 being a hotter, drier year and affecting the production. You know, as you're coming into the
Well,
spring,
yeah.
warmer. How do they adjust?
So what could happen because we're in alpage, so most of these places don't have electricity. So it could be that the amount, like the temperature of the milk in the morning will be too high because the temperature didn't go down enough during the night. So this is an immediate effect is you're going to change your recipe, having maybe less cultures or different cultures because the milk will already be more mature. Yes. And then the midterm effect of that is, well, if you don't have water, it tends to be you don't have feed either, right? Because the grass won't grow enough. So what happens is simply you end the season faster. You just come down earlier because you can't keep that many cows up there without feed or water.
So the season doesn't have a set start and end date. It is just whenever they're up, and then again, if they have to come down early, they come down early.
As per Swiss law, seasonal means you're not there all year, and you have like X amount of days you're allowed to be up there, and that amount of that's like 100 or 120 days, and that's it. It's complete. It's considered estivage. That means during the summer, and there's a transhumance process, going up and going down, not staying there.
I promise I'm listening. We're also trying to answer some questions in the chat also. No, that's interesting. I thought last fall that I hadn't really considered, climate change and how that affects production. So
I'm sure many people haven't considered climate change yet. How was the cheese, by the way? The alpage?
Delicious. I certainly have my favorites. They're all great. And I'm sure Jonathan also had his favorites, but I was particularly fond of Sermon this year. I would say Chanel was my second favorite after that.
And feedback from customers was good?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's also kind of part of it this year was, again, kind of marking time in a way, too. I think it was such a nice thing to have at that, there was so little reflection of seasonality in 2020. There was so much just kind of staring at white walls. that it was quite a treat to have something land and be kind of like special and
So basically, you knew that when you were eating alpage, you were eating cheese from a time where people didn't wear masks.
I mean, kinda, yeah.
Like a time capsule.
Yeah. But we'll be back someday.
Okay,
Guy, thank you so much for your time.
you're welcome.
For all of the background information. I always learn something. And it's a pleasure to see you, and I hope all is well and that we actually
I wish I could say the same.
soon. Thanks, friend.